he refers to as well for punishing me for not doing things your way is almost zero. If you've got a bad experience with the voice user interface once or twice, you probably say, yeah, this is rubbish, it doesn't work. And so this is really something we have to take into account. The mantra can also be extended. I like this title, don't make me tap. Basically, of course, as another famous interaction designer said, you can't touch this. It's nothing tangible. It's just there in the air, it's words. But hopefully, we ask the same questions. I mean, we're professionals in UX. If we can't answer any of these, we probably shouldn't be thinking about a voice user interface or a graphical user interface in the first place. So nothing to be worried about, it's very, very similar. There are a few things, however, on the flip side that might be slightly different. So we all know the polar bear, our good friend, helping us through information architecture, navigation, and so on. You just have to be aware that navigation for voice is a very different beast, literally. So we've got a parrot here, not a polar bear. And voice is a great flattener of hierarchy, but it also means there's almost, we talk about no navigation really. It still remains pretty linear, so even if you leave the happy path, you have to consider that very, very often, but what you want to be designing for is something in a few steps, and then it gets you to an end. There's no huge information architecture that you can create. And you might really want to consider adding a parrot to your polar bear as well, if you're looking at voice, because there's some really good stuff in there that covers the basics by Kathy. Also, again, for another talk, hundreds of stats, but you just have to be aware that habits might, even just with a medium voice, might really differ depending on the devices that you use. So this would be voice usage on Android, this would be on Google Home products. They might just be very different depending on the time of day, depending on where you are, how you use it for. So we know context is king, which is true all the time as well. We also have to take into account the attention span when someone actually uses our voice user interface. They really want to get something done very, very quickly, and then they're excited about it, and then they just leave, and it doesn't really matter. This device just sits there in the kitchen or the living room. You go about your day, then you want to know something, then you might return. With other devices, you might have them, check them regularly. They might be next to you if it's a big desktop screen or your mobile phone that you might have open for a longer time. So obviously also things we as designers have to consider for voice as for anything else. It's really important, even more so, that we are clear of what a user can be doing. I mean, even this is really horrible. I think there's a dialogue box from hell. And you really have to think about it. But if this would have been spoken, I'd be completely lost. At least here, I'd have an idea and I could try things. But imagine this with your eyes closed, you probably would be completely lost. And what you have to account for, your users will be thrown off the happy path much more than anticipated. You have to be prepared for that. But in voice, we haven't got these lovely little browser games, which I really love. Does anyone sometimes switch off their Wi-Fi on purpose just to play with this? Yeah, see, yeah, admit to it. I know you're not admitting to it. But I think we haven't got any of that. So none of these nice little geeky things, we haven't got that. And we haven't got a 404 page as well that we can sort of load with lovely things. So this has to be taken into account. So stuff you want to consider. Again, if we go back to one of these models and look at the discovery phase, obviously everything should start with a good use case or thinking about a good use case. A nice little exercise that's part of the career founding course as well is just trying to think of applications or tools that you use on an everyday basis and how they could translate to voice, or how voice could enhance them, or how could they be voice only, and just reflect on that. Another exercise I give my people in workshops as well before is try to spend the whole day doing everything that you usually do with a visual user interface with your voice, and just see what happens, see where there's lacks, where gaps, and where there are gaps, and where it could be really, really nice. So here's examples I picked from apps I regularly use. I should use Joan Creeper a bit more, I think, especially after my California trip, but that's another story as well. And I could have gone on and on. I mean, what if you could think of a use case, for instance, for an elevator or a lift? How could you use our voice to be in an elevator or lift? I mean, it's a great idea. We've established voice is powerful, so what could possibly go wrong?
What's the buttons?
No, they installed voice recognition technology in this lift. I heard about this.
Voice recognition technology in a lift in Scotland. You ever tried voice recognition technology?
No.
They don't do Scottish accents.
11.
Could you please repeat that?
11.
11. 11.
11.
Could you please repeat that?
11.
Whose idea was this? You need to try an American accent.
11. 11.
That sounds Irish, not American.
Yeah, doesn't it?
11.
Where in America is that? Dublin?
I'm sorry. Could you please repeat that?
Try an English accent, right? 11. 11.
You for the same part of England as Dick Van Dyke?
Listen, yours then, smart ass.
Please speak slowly and clearly.
Smart ass.
11.
I'm sorry. Could you please repeat that?
I think you see where this is going, and this, I urge you to watch this to the end. It's really, really very funny. But of course, as UX designers, we could have also thought to ourselves: is it a good idea, is it a good use case to have voice in a lift anyway, which is a public environment, having different people from different backgrounds? Again, the same answer applies. Just because we can do it, it doesn't mean we should be doing it. Just some examples from, so we know our devices that we've talked about, but there's also voice in the industry. So this is an example for a custom-made solution for Honeywell, how they improve their pick and pack processing in a warehouse. So this person could just say, yeah, I'm finished, and then he gets the voice command, go to aisle 52, to corridor 3, and pick that, and then he can just continue his work without having to use a screen-based interface, for example. I'm just going to rush through this quickly. Home, of course, the whole smart home automation, also a big field. I just put up this example to see the different players and devices involved in doing something like this. And then again, all our skills that we talked about. I said it before, over 50,000 skills at Amazon and only 3,000 of devices. And skills or actions on Google are similar to apps. Skills should have a clear purpose and really do a few things really well as well. So from here you can see the brands here, from ordering an Uber, having Fitbit tell you your fitness stats, to ordering pizza, pre-ordering stuff at Starbucks and so on, buying tickets on Virgin trains. There's a myriad of use cases that you could think of, and you can just browse the categories as well on Amazon and Google to see what they use. Again, this would definitely be for another talk. But whatever we think about what voice could be good for, there's a few things that we should try to apply to make it worthwhile. So it should somehow improve the user experience and make very clear what it can do, what it cannot do. It should be as frictionless as possible, and we have to account for the times that frictions actually occur. If we can, either if it is by using humor or little other things, little hints that maybe someone did not expect, we could surprise and delight our customers. And if we're in an environment like a news, weather, sports results realm, something like that, of course our content has to be super crisp, super fresh as well. So this is something that applies to many other designs as well, but it's particularly important for good VUI design. Think about these rules of thumbs. Think about context and tasks that you might be doing. And this is a general set of rules. Beware of them, but be happy to break them as well, if this makes sense for your service or not. This is just as a rule of thumb that you can take on board and then see if this is true for your device or your service. So, in graphic user interface design, when we design for our eyes, some GUI artifacts that we use in the discovery phase could include something like an empathy map. We know this. We're quite accustomed to a user persona, for instance. Even if it's been debated, the value in the last few years, I still think it's a valuable tool, depending on the project. Obviously, hopefully it's based on real research. Hopefully it's validated with customer service or people that actually know these people. Then I think it is a good tool. Same here, you know, again, we're happy when we can stick post-its above the wall, do some dot voting. think about the user's journey. Again, hopefully based on real research and observations. We could take it to the next level with a service blueprint and have a look at what actually happens on the technical side. We're accustomed to all these things in the discovery phase. But what do we do for voice? Really, all of the above still apply, but there's a few things that we might want to think about a bit deeper. As we already said, the incredible power that voice has and that evokes in us, we must really think about something called a system persona as well. So what is this thing that's talking to us? Is it more instructional? Has it got humor? Is it very authoritative? Has it got a gender? If so, which gender and why? And this is really a crucial part of any conversational user interface. This could be for a chatbot as well. I mean, I like the Slack bot, for instance. He or she's just a thing, but he uses a lot of humor and slickness. But everything like this has been designed as well. And branding and marketing people might be good people to talk to, actually, to see that it's in line with the tone of voice that you as a brand have altogether as well. So what does this mean? How do we want our users to be approached by our system? So you create it like a normal persona, but think a bit more about what would they say, what's a sample dialogue that would be typical for them. And this can help you, just like use a persona, to always double check, are we still on the right track? You could try hacking your empathy map as well to match the system persona. I haven't done it yet, but I think this could be quite easily done and reverse engineered to something like voice. It's definitely something I want to try for my next project. And obviously you also have to think, when you think about this system persona, what are we doing? Is Alexa's voice or Google Home's voice good enough? Do we want to add some personalization via MP3, for instance? Do we make or buy this thing? Do we actually buy professional voiceover actors? And just like imagery or illustrations, if you want quality, you get what you pay for. And this is the same for voice, of course, as well. Another quite useful tool, also taken from our toolbox, but I think for voice is particularly useful, are personas. So we're thinking about a bit more about the context of our use case and what's happening here. What modalities have we actually got? And what does this mean for the interaction that we're doing? Is voice a good idea here? Is voice a bad idea here? Definitely something we need to consider, and very helpful when we think about something that's meaningful for voice. Also, a cool tool that we can apply and think about a bit more, because we've got the tone of voice here, we've got the devices, is just something like scenario mapping. This is an example from the BBC that they used for a children's drama skill or app. So just very clear, mapping stuff out, using a canvas that we could use for any other product, but taking into account what is specific to voice here. Another nice one that I haven't tried yet for voice, but I think is really cool, is from Futurist, a Finnish company, and they've got this open source IoT toolkit, which is totally free for you to download, and you can 3D print these little actors as well. And it's like a board game, basically, for co-creating user-centric IoT experiences. But you could very easily just do this for voice, and then maybe think about other things that might occur around the journey. And at the end of the game, you get like what types of devices and technologies your service needs to actually exist. You get a visualization of all the steps and touch points that make up your service. So is the device only in one room? Is it spread throughout the whole house or office, for instance? What kinds of data do we need? Who are the people we need to talk to make this fly? So I think you could easily reverse hack this as well for voice. A nice little thing here. That's free for you to download. If we think about the other phases, so concepting and prototype user testing, these very much overlap. I mean, even in normal UX, they sometimes overlap. It's not so clear-cut. I think in voice, they overlap even more. And there's no real clear handover point. But if we think about what GUI mantras we apply in these phases, or what GUI tools we apply in these phases, I mean, we've all told this to our people at workshops: show, don't tell. Just get it onto paper quickly. Don't have it in your head. Start scribbling. If you're, I mean, this is also already an advanced scribble. Of course, we tell the people it doesn't have to be art, just draw it. We might then resort to our lo-fi wireframes. Oopsie, sorry, it's a bit early. That could look like this, or you could just use block diagrams to make clear, talk about information architecture hierarchy and some of the main features. We all know this, and it's tools we use all the time when we design for screen or for our eyes. Then use mid-fidelity wireframes, for example. Use stuff like the wireframe UI kit for XD, which is really useful. Cool, we've got a myriad of tools for the trade that we've got. Of course, here we're a bit biased because XD is obviously really good. But we know what we do. We use we might work together with other designers we're accustomed to, bring it into our tool, prototype it, share it with developers, share it with people on a screen so they can comment these things. But what do we do for our ears? So what do we do with the mantra of show and tell, for instance? I can't remember the last time I've heard this. So really, what are wireframes for our ears, if you think about it in that sense? Really, it goes back to super basic human interaction. Interaction is writing dialogues, and in this case, sample dialogues. You don't have to script out everything yet, but you think of very very happy paths and scenarios, and you think, well, what could go wrong? You write a few extreme examples, and these help you document the basic interaction options. They help you to align the stuff with your stakeholders, demonstrate highlights and lowlights, like I said. So like any wireframe on a screen would do, just to start a conversation, you would start with writing some of the dialogues. And it also gives you an indication, am I on the right path here? Do I need more input? So all the mantras that would apply to a wireframe here. We haven't got our sexy tools, we just got something to write at this moment in time. But what I really like, and this should be good practice for any UXer anyway, I think it's finally, the hour has come that we can bury lorem ipsum, I think, because we won't get away with any placeholder content, any placeholder text. The thing that's spoken has to be real, otherwise it won't work. And then it just involves a lot of writing, a lot of talking once written, a lot of writing, a lot of talking once written, and doing it over and over again. So testing even more early and even more often than we would do for our screens, just to see, does this feel right? Is this weird? And you do much more of that. I've got some stats later on as well that shows it. The good news is, rejoice, you can still use post-it notes as well. You could start writing little dialogues on post-it notes and seeing how these work in a flow, for instance. You could also take something from an age-old discipline and table read early and often, so the two people have got the dialogues scripted out on a sheet of A4 paper, and they actually act it out like a role play. Again, ask your local screenwriter, filmmaker, or actor what they do. Super useful people to have on, even ideally on board of your team, but to learn from as well in this instance. So just think about, it's 2014 and you're on the core Alexa team and have to create a sample dialogue, for instance, how you want to set an alarm. So all you've got as a tool is a word processing tool, really. And you start with something like this. And that's all it is, really. Think, what will the user say? What will the system say? Okay, this is very simple. You might go on and think about some alternatives, and this list can become really long. Recent Google research showed, I think their users have got 3,500 different ways of asking to set an alarm. So again, think about what could be said and what happens if what is said is not understood. Can you still help them to find the real thing? So like on a good 404 page. You've got here, yeah. For all the things that can be weird. Do you want to apply restrictions? Should they set an alarm infinitely, or do you want to limit it to a week? And you have to tell people about it. Do you tell them up front? Do you tell them in the moment they failed? So all of the thinking as a designer applies to these dialogues just as much. It's just not so sexy, but super useful. And really remember here, like an example here, remember to leave the happy path more than once. Take all the restrictions into account and how far, so I said, how far into the future can it go? It all needs to be designed. It's all designed. It's our job to delight and not frustrate. No one else will do it if we don't do it. There's another sample dialogue from the custom skill, for instance. If you want to, you could be booking a flight. This would be an example Mark would have shown, for instance. You could choose to illustrate it a bit more. to give it some clarity. Well, this is not needed. This is just nice to maybe if you want to show it to clients or want to get buy-in, but the core thing is really everything that I showed you before. So when you're wireframing for your ears and writing sample dialogues, see that these are basically things you want to take into account. You haven't got all this screen real estate and all these fancy things, so keep it brief, think about what it does, what it should do really well, tell the people what they can do, keep it crisp and small, but always think, what is if they want more than 3 items, for example? How do we deal with that? Do we give them an option? Do we show them something else? Don't stress the cognitive overload of the people. Let them process what you're asking them and then give them other options. And definitely don't assume, as we all know, assume, ask you and me, makes an ass out of you and me. The user will not know what to do or what will happen next, so help him or guide him or her on the way. But to me, I think, even if this looks a bit mundane, I think this is really dialogues and conversation, the purest form of interaction design that there is. And I think it's really a form of going back to basics and thinking about what our role as designers actually is. So I think there's a lot of power in something like this and thinking about stuff like that. You have to go on also, I mean, what linguistics teaches us. You have to really think how people talk. They talk differently to what they write. They have a conversation. A search term would be very different written down than to what you would say to a machine. Think about little things that can add a natural touch, like these little conversation markers, contractions, specifically in English, very important. Use SSML tags, which is sort of a thing to add human touch. So you can add volume, speed, pauses, emphasis. In the US, you can now whisper to Alexa, and Alexa will whisper back to you, for instance. Not available in Germany yet, probably because Germans never whisper. But again, that's for another talk. And you just have to try it the same as you would with the interface. Avoid repetitive phrases and avoid technical lingo and jargon. So a good mix of things that we do anyway and things that are particular to voice. Again, more GUI artifacts that we have, we might use something like this, like a wire flow. What have you got for our ears? Again, the good old task flow comes into play. If you really want to act it out, where is it? If you really want to act it out, you have to think about these UML diagrams or simpler forms of that. So things I find, that's why I like it, going back to basics as well, it's stuff I've learned when I had information architect written on my business card, and that I find a lot of younger generation designers that might call themselves UX, UI designers is something they lack. They might have never done something like that, or they might have never done a content inventory. Not sexy, but super useful specifically for very complex tasks. And I feel a lot of the younger generation sometimes lack these skills to go in depth. And I think this forces every designer, no matter what seniority, to think again and go back to these basics. And then you could basically match your simple dialogues to that. And this is still sort of in the wireframing, rough conceptual phase, but you should definitely think about these things. Put them into context. So you create an overview of your flows, and you'll be surprised. Maybe you might just start with something like this or similar examples. But then, okay, what to do with snooze? What to do with stopping it? What do you do with help, stop, and cancel? Amazon won't let you publish any skill that hasn't got this in there, so you won't get any further anyway. And they force you to do this. But it's definitely something you have to think about and take into account as well. Obviously, if you are so inclined and you have got sketching skills like here, there's no reason why you cannot apply a storyboard then, so you add some videos again to go there. But still, you would need to tell a story, and you would take on board the sample dialogues for that. Again, for our eyes, old school. I mean, a lot of us are over this phase, having real technical specifications or really granular concepts. Sometimes every other now and then a corporate client, specifically in Germany, I don't know what it's like here, comes along and needs these old school specifications because they will go and give it to another technical provider, for instance. They're not doing it in-house, so it's still very waterfally. So it's still a thing. Every now and then, at least in Germany, does anyone still use these technical specs in the room? Okay, so a few. Okay, so still a thing. But if you do it for your ears, the fun starts all over again. So really, you have to really act it all out. It's still a thing in voice. Again, not sexy, but useful. You have to dissect your flow bit by bit and specify the hell out of your dialogue, really. You have to take everything into account. Very, very waterfall, but you won't get around it if you really want to map out what your voice user interface will be able to do. Also, our friends, the Use Lab and the eye tracking, all rendered useless probably for voice. A/B testing, very, very difficult to do for our ears. So what have we got for our ears? Basically, it all comes down to Wizard of Oz testing that you might know. So someone would sit behind a wall, act as the machine, and then you could have a device like this on the table or the actual device, and people would role play and try to see how this sounds. I don't need this anymore now. You can have that. I'm gonna open them up and show them around because none of you have got popcorn. In Alexa, you can actually use live testing and beta testing before you publish your skill. You can actually send it to a certain amount of email users that will then check your test up front. This is what you can do. So it's, again, same, but slightly different. We've gone through all these things here that you might be able to use. And we've talked about this whole notion of it being voice first. It's voice first and not voice only, I told you before as well. Because of course, things are evolving and the future of voice is definitely multimodal. So suddenly screens back into the equation again. Hang on, you just said we only need our voice. Well, that's because I think we should consider the basics first and then think how the technology is evolving. I mean, you see the devices here. You've got our Echo Spot. I've got one at home as well, which can complement my skills. Just out 3 weeks ago, there is no sound. Don't be surprised. This is the new generation of Echo shows, the second generation. So again, it would be, you would use your voice first to do something because you're occupied, but you use it for something else as well. And then on October, this was end of September, October the 9th, Google came along with the Google Home Hub. Looks a bit similar, doesn't it? I don't know, maybe some different colors. See what they're doing there. These guys joined the party, whatever that means, I don't know yet in the future. It's definitely a thing, so very, very similar devices. And look how happy these people are, because they have got an Echo button, which is actually a little game, a little device, 18 bucks or something for the pair, and you can do little reaction games. You can play Trivial Pursuit, for instance, and this might seem very, very flat and uninspiring or boring, but I think it's interesting that Amazon is not shying away from just playing around with the idea, what else can we use, what other modalities can we use, because they've got light, and you can touch them to do a thing. It's still controlled by your voice device, and they sort of pair up with it. I tried it, I wasn't as happy as these guys, but it was entertaining enough. At a recent hackathon, for instance, in Hamburg, people tried around how could you use this for fitness, for instance. How could you place it maybe here, so you have to touch a thing in a certain time to gather points, and you could play against someone. So I think it's just up to our imagination what we can do with these limited things. And actually, it's always been multimodal. So again, don't get hyped up with this. Oh, now this is the new frontier of voice design. Now we've got multimodality. Actually, it was always multimodal, because we had the Ring right from the outset. You could actually touch. You could actually touch it as an alternative. You'd have sound. You'd have, of course, sound coming out of it. And right from the outset, you actually need an app for it to work, and you still need it to work. So you could start something on your voice, even if you haven't got an Echo Show, for instance. You could ask for a recipe, and they would send a card to your Alexa device. So it's always been multimodal, and people have been thinking about this anyway. Again, last time I checked was yesterday morning. Oops, suddenly this came along, and we're going to touch on this a bit later. So we've got a new player in town where we can sketch out some things. We'll talk about this in a moment. Again, last time I checked, it changes every day. If we talk about multimodality, we have to think about things like, well, what's the alternative to icons for our ears, for instance? We've got a various amount of emojis and icons that we work with on our screens. what have our ears got?
You've got mail.
There's a thing called earcons, for instance. And what a coincidence, it was Mark, who used to be with SaySpring, who got acquired by Adobe, and they basically empowered voice in XD, who wrote an interesting article about the whole notion of an earcon, which is the audio version of an icon, which can be just as iconic for your ears. I mean, we all know it. This one was a famous example. Again, for another talk, the whole sound thing, but I really urge you to listen to this podcast. It's really cool. You've got the sound designers responsible for the Facebook Messenger and the Google Pixel, talking about their whole design process and how they consider sound as an ingredient for design. And it's really very interesting how meticulous they go. Also remember, new input devices really don't kill their predecessors, they just stack on top of them. And I really think this makes a lot of sense, what this person is saying here. I can only quote him. And what does this mean for our collaborations? Should designers learn to code? Is an age-old discussion that we've been having for ages. It's a bit boring. Suddenly, maybe it's should designers learn to speak? Ooh. Whatever we come to, we should start looking out of our bubble, listen and learn from disciplines and people that know a bit about voice and sound, definitely. Ideally, they're also on your team, because this will create a great product, as with anything. So listen to what these people have got to say. What can they bring into the equation? If you're lucky enough to have them in your company, involve them early and often, if not, buy expertise from the outside. And of course, you can't do it without these guys, because even if we can prototype and sketch little things, it's still a thing to get it online. So it's really important to know what backend calls are we making, what data are we asking the user for, what technical constraints have we got, either with the technology or the ecosystem. And it's definitely something you don't want to worry about later, because then it will just break. And just in as well, on Friday, there's been a nice conference in Munich, all about voice, and these were some very open figures. I thought Deutsche Bahn, so the German rail provider, opened up, but they still won't say how many hours of user testing they did. It's just to say it's hard to get voice right as well. It's not so mundane and so easy as you might think. Because we're pressed for time, I'll just jump over this. You can check this URL and see how the Alexa design team talks about this and what they bring to the table. Again, a quote that makes a hell of a lot of sense: voice isn't the new UI paradigm. It's just another interface that we have to consider as designers, and we've got a lot of skills that we can actually use. So what I tell Anya is, please, you are definitely equipped, or anyone else who's a designer, who's a classical UX designer, you are totally equipped to do these things. You just have to take on board a few other things, but it's up to us to create cool and meaningful experiences there, and not only leave it to developers and marketers, although they're important, so don't get me wrong here. But if there's no designers on board, there will be mediocre stuff out there, and we know this from other industries as well. Again, if you want to get started, 5 tips. Get a parrot into your library, next to the polar bear. Oops. Check out these principles. For instance, Ben, formerly of Clear Left, someone who's done a lot of research, a good UX person into voice principles. There's a nice list, and I'll share these slides with you anyway later. They'll be somewhere available on the Adobe Max site. The stuff that Amazon and Google have out there aimed at their developers is excellent. It's really all good best practice stuff. Katie Pearl, the author of the Parrot book, is now with Google as well, so everything you want to learn is in there. If you want to dig a bit deeper, you could take advantage of this discount code, for instance, and actually really dedicate some time. As I say, but it's not to be taken easy. I took 3 approaches to get it into my busy schedule, so you do have to take into account 10 to 12 hours, or even 15 hours a week to get this done in time. 120 hours of a bit more input. This was my mentor. I highly recommend him. They're all good VUI mentors, but he's a nice geek who I just like. That's why I'm just pushing him here, but everyone's good there. And last time I checked, I gave you 5 tips. Yesterday morning, I had this email in my inbox. A really nice, usually a good podcast anyway, but there's already some learnings again that have been shared with the world. And because I was at Max, I hadn't had a chance to listen to it yet. Definitely something I'd encourage you to do. What I'd love for us to do is, if this excites you as much as it does me, let's just keep in touch. Maybe we can do some projects together. Let's keep the conversation flowing. I'm always looking for gigs in the VUI field as well, because I find now, often as a freelancer, you don't get into companies or these innovation labs so easily, at least in Germany. So if there's anything like that, I'm happy to travel and do remote work as well. Let's just chat, have a cup of tea, and see what happens. Now, until yesterday as well, I had to be completely stumm, although I'm on the XDI team. And if Mark would have been in the room, you would have all been thinking this now. So he's not in the room. So you might all be thinking this. What does this mean? So this is going to be definitely a whistle stop. I'll just quickly jump into XD and see if I can demonstrate.